Okay, so in this video I'll be demonstrating how to make a paper stencil and how to apply it. So you'll be using the images that were sketched in your notebook, and I'm just going to quickly kind of make one up. So when you're making a stencil, you want to consider the size of your box. In this case, this is really small. It's about 3 inches, so I can't make something huge or it'll go off the border. So I folded the paper twice, and you can use the positive stencil or the actual thing itself. You're also welcome to use the negative. So in art terminology, negative is anything that's negative space where you can sort of poke your hand through. Positive is something that takes up space. So we can use both portions decoratively. So you'll be kind of telling a story that unfolds on each panel. This is just an example of how to apply a stencil. So you're going to need water, any temperature. Dip your paper stencil. This is just a little piece of scrap printer paper. And you want to dip the stencil in water, squeeze out any of the space. If it doesn't adhere well, you can just add a little more water to stick it on. So when the piece is bone dry, it absorbs water easily. And once it's on there, we'll do the reverse on this side. Actually, yeah, we'll do the reverse here. So we'll dip our stencil. You can apply it on the lid, under the lid. It really doesn't matter, it's just your choice. And when I use the underglaze, I'll want to be careful not to get it out here in this area. This is my border. Oops. It's good to have a pin tool handy in case things land where you don't want them, so that you can adjust them a little bit. And it's a delicate process. We need a little more water. You can use a small round sponge, or you can just use your hands. The most important thing about working with this technique is getting the edges to adhere to the clay so that you get a nice crisp outline. The paper is going to want to rip, so you'll want to position it as accurately as you can without taking it off too many times. Okay, so once it's on there, you'll then use a smooth rubber rib. You can use a metal rib, or I prefer these soft, flexible silicone ribs. You can also just use your fingers, and you just want to press the edges down. We're squeezing out any excess water and space between the outline. And now we'll mix up our underglaze. Anytime you're working with a commercial underglaze, it's important to shake the container because the solids will settle and you want a nice even coat. If you're using more than one color, you have to use a palette. You can use a glazed bowl or plate that you find on the shelves for the empty bowls charity. So there are a ton on the shelf close to the window. Okay. And now we're going to apply our color. So I have red underneath. And now we're going to apply this bright orange. You'll have to let it dry for at least 30 seconds to a minute. And here I'm going to apply it over this one. So with underglazes, you'll want to apply at least 2 to 3 coats to get nice even coverage. If you're layering color and want the color underneath to show through, especially if it's a darker color, you can just apply one layer. And so underglaze is just a colored slip. It's basically white slip with the colorant. And so if you're applying a light over a dark color, you might get a mixing of color in that area, or you might see the dark color kind of shining through a lighter translucent underglaze. So I made this other stencil which we can apply here just to see what it does. So we'll dip it in the water to stick it on and give this a funky little border. Needs a little more water. Adhere it. Get those edges down. Apply our color. So it's a wonderful decorating technique. And you get really nice crisp edges, especially when you layer on the underglaze pretty thick. Oops, there's a little too much water down on the table. So be careful with water and bone dry work. If your piece gets saturated with too much water, it can start to disintegrate, so just be mindful of that. I'll actually put it on this little test tile. So this side is ready for a second coat. So we'll go ahead and apply it. Oops. So when your stencil lifts off like that, there's a good chance that it gets under and gets a little blurry and messy. We can do this side. So the underglaze is great for filling in small cracks that may have appeared on your work. This is still a little too wet, but I'll just glob it on there. So it dries pretty fast, and then once it's no longer shiny, you can begin to remove your stencils. I'll apply this strange one over here. Or maybe I'll apply it to the top here. That one's tricky. We'll do it in two separate pieces. So this is a fairly, this is a contemporary technique. Okay. Layer that on there. Press down the edges. Okay, I think we're ready. So you can give it more time, but if you're impatient like I am, I just kind of want to reveal this to show you what it looks like. So we can use our pen tool to free a small corner of the paper stencil. The best paper is paper that doesn't have wax on it, so any newsprint or printer paper will work really well. So there you go. So I didn't do a good job pressing the edges of the stencil, but you can clean it up with one of your tools, either the pen tool or a carving tool, just to clean up some of those edges. I'd also like you to do a little bit of sgraffito So if you had a really detailed, intricate design, you might want to layer down a color, an underglaze layer, and then scratch into it to reveal the clay color underneath. So it'll provide good contrast. Now all these little burrs that are coming up should not be rubbed off while it's wet. You can wait until it dries and then remove them so that it doesn't smudge the design. So we can go ahead and take this one off. It's okay if a little paper remains. The paper will just burn away in the kiln, but that's a really nice edge. We'll lift this one off. So your stencils are a one-time use. Once they're saturated with water, they'll just start to fall apart. This one kind of bled where it lifted. We'll leave that one on. If you want to leave the stencils on when they fully dry, the paper will curl and unpeel itself. So you don't have to do this unless you really want to see the result immediately. It's a really great technique, so I'd love for you to practice it on your slab box project, and to also incorporate it on your prehistoric vessel reproduction. Okay, great.